There are visions that illuminate, and others that set everything they touch on fire. Some heal, others break you beyond repair. Imagine this: a defeated man, exiled in Babylon, a priest without a temple, a mute prophet, a humiliated people chained by the Kabar River. God seemed to have abandoned them. Silence was their punishment. But what if God's silence wasn't forgetfulness, but a prelude? What if the voice that breaks exile isn't comfort, but a thunder that devastates? There, in the heart of the enemy empire, the heavens open, not to give peace, but to show fire and wind, wheels within wheels covered in living eyes, impossible creatures with faces of man, lion, ox, and eagle, a burning throne upheld over the abyss. How do you explain what was designed to be inexplicable? How do you describe the terror of seeing God move when you thought you had locked him in a destroyed temple? Ezekiel didn't ask to see. He was forced to fall face down, to eat a bitter scroll full of laments and woes, to warn a people who covered their ears. Today we're going to look at that vision, not to reduce it to simple doctrine, not to tame it, but to sit with the trembling it leaves in your chest, because there are messages that don't sell, truths that don't soothe, and a God who refuses to be contained in our certainties. Why show this to a defeated man in exile? Why reveal himself like this in enemy land? Perhaps to remind us that he doesn't ask permission to be God, and that once you see, you can never unsee. This is Divine Code, and welcome. If you've seen the previous episode, you know we talked about Ezekiel, not just as another prophet, but as the man of exile, the priest without a temple, the watchman forced to warn a defeated people. If you haven't seen it, I recommend going back to that video to better understand the weight of his mission. Because nothing we're going to explore now makes sense without knowing where he comes from. Today we're going to dive into the place where all of this happens. Into exile. Into Babylon. Not to treat this vision as some distant myth or weird Bible chapter, but as a human story, real, painful, 586 BC. Imagine Jerusalem burning, the temple, the glory of the people, their identity, their pride, turned to ashes and smoke. The walls that protected their world falling under Babylon's weight. It wasn't just military defeat. It was the breaking of a covenant. The silence of a God who no longer defended them. The survivors, in chains, marched over 800 kilometers east to a strange land, where the air was thick with pagan incense and stone-winged demons watched over towering temples, where the king called himself a living God. And among them was Ezekiel, a priest with no altar, consecrated to serve in a temple that no longer existed, living in Tel Aviv by the Kabar River, where nostalgia mixed with humiliation and fear. This isn't a decorative myth, it's history. Archaeologists have unearthed 6th century BC Babylonian administrative tablets with Jewish names listed as property of King Nebuchadnezzar II. Ancient reliefs show columns of naked prisoners, ropes around their necks, carrying offerings for the god-king who had conquered them. Imagine losing your home, your land, your language, watching your children grow up speaking the tongue of your enemies. Imagine trying to pray in a place where your God seems to have fallen silent forever. It is there, right there, in the belly of the enemy empire, where people thought God was no longer present, that the heavens open. But they don't open with gentle words or easy promises. They open with fire, wind, and impossible glory, for a broken man, for a broken people, and for us, who even today try to understand what it really means to see God move where we least expect it, dismantling the myth of a tame God. I want you to do something with me now. Forget for a moment the easy explanations. Quiet your critical mind. Try to see it. Try to hear it. A stormy wind from the north. A burning cloud with living fire. Impossible faces. Man, lion, ox, eagle fused into a form that defies logic. Wings crashing like a raging sea. Wheels within wheels, covered in living eyes that pierce to your soul. A throne of molten sapphire with a human-like figure wrapped in pure fire. It is beautiful and terrifying. It is lovely and violent. It is impossible to explain, and yet it speaks to us. What is this vision really? A warning of imminent judgment? A comfort for exiles, reminding them their God hasn't abandoned them? A portrait of the madness of seeing the divine without veils? A reminder that God can't be owned or defined? A symbol that God's presence is not fixed, but moves, even in exile? Maybe it is all of that at once. Maybe it was given precisely so no one could trap it in a single interpretation, to make us uncomfortable, to shake us, to force us to ask, who is this God? Today we prefer a God explained in simple phrases, who promises us success, happiness, certainty. But Ezekiel's vision is a living enigma, a message coded in terror and wonder, a God who doesn't ask permission to break into the place of punishment, who doesn't leave his people comfortable, who burns before he heals. Is it judgment, a revelation, a warning, a promise disguised as fire? In Jewish tradition, the mystics of the Merkava dared to meditate on this vision with fear and trembling, because they knew that whoever misunderstood it could break inside. Not because God is evil, but because he is too real. In the Middle Ages, artists tried to capture it, but their brushes failed. How do you paint something that wasn't meant to be seen without consequences? How do you translate mystery without betraying it? Maybe faith isn't just believing comfortable things. Maybe it's having the courage to contemplate the fire, to recognize that this God is not limited to what is safe, that his glory doesn't just illuminate, it also consumes, that his love can be wild, untamable, dangerous. Maybe the problem was never that God stopped speaking. Maybe we stopped being amazed, stopped letting mystery transform us, stopped accepting that sometimes truth can't be explained, it can only be contemplated. And that is something worth exploring together. The pain and exile as a place of revelation. Pause for a moment. Try to imagine the humiliation. Jerusalem reduced to rubble, the temple burning down to ashes, the symbol of a covenant that seemed broken, promises carved in stone turned to dust, the people in chains, forced to march over 800 kilometers to Babylon. A strange land, unknown languages, stone gods with winged demon faces on the walls of pagan temples, an empire that proudly proclaimed, "Even your God surrendered." And there, in the belly of the enemy, in the place of absolute defeat, God speaks. It's an unsettling paradox. The holy place was destroyed, the promised land profaned, the national identity shattered. Why choose that place? Why speak there in exile, where the pain is rawest? Perhaps to teach us something essential. That God is not limited to our borders. That his voice doesn't fall silent when everything falls apart. That his presence doesn't depend on temples, structures, or successes. That he doesn't belong to us, but still seeks us. But there's another reading. Perhaps exile was more than punishment. Perhaps it was a brutal awakening, a discipline that stripped away false securities, that destroyed religious charms, that burned complacency to make space for something true. Because the people had made the temple into an empty amulet, a symbol without commitment, a God they could control. And God refuses to be tamed, so he speaks, where they can't ignore him, where everything they thought secure has collapsed. It's uncomfortable, it's devastating, but perhaps it's also grace disguised as ruin, a voice that can only be heard when all others have gone silent. Does God still speak in our exile? Where is he when everything has fallen apart? Maybe precisely there, in forced migrations, in silent hospitals, in refugee camps, in cities crowded with loneliness, in burned-out temples, literal or emotional. And ask yourself, where has God spoken to you when you thought he was silent? In what personal exile did he speak the most uncomfortable but truest words? And what if exile was never his absence, but the only place where at last we truly listened? I don't want you to leave this vision of Ezekiel locked in the pages of an ancient book, because his message didn't die in Babylon. It speaks today, to us. We might not raise stone idols with carved wings, but ours are just as demanding. Success, money, power, recognition, comfort. We build invisible temples, personal altars where we sacrifice time, family, integrity to mute but convenient gods that never contradict us, that promise us security, pleasure, control. But Ezekiel's vision interrupts us. It makes us uncomfortable. It warns us the true God will not be tamed. He doesn't kneel before our projects. He doesn't settle for the small space we give him on Sundays. He is fire. He is movement. And sometimes God burns what is useless, not out of cruelty, but to reveal what is true. False temples, corrupt securities, invisible idolatries, to remind us that his glory can't be contained in our molds. But let's be honest, do we really want a God like that? One who cannot be controlled, who might destroy before rebuilding, who won't accept our terms. Ask yourself with me, what temples will burn in our generation? What structures, social, spiritual, personal, will have to fall so we can hear again? Are we prepared for a God who moves, even if it leaves us with no excuses? Are we willing to follow him, even if it means giving up control? But it's not just destruction. It's also renewal. A fire that purifies, a voice that interrupts to save, a movement that tears down pride, but leaves room for hope. Because don't be fooled. God doesn't stay where we leave him. He moves, judges, renews, destroys to create anew. And this vision we've only just touched is only the beginning. There are more mysteries that unsettle, more truths that shake us, more challenges that won't leave us the same. If you want, we can explore them together. No promises of easy answers, but with the certainty that it's worth asking, that the truth doesn't always soothe, but always sets us free. If you're ready for this journey, subscribe, because there is so much more to discover.